She was abducted right outside her home, and 20 years later, no one knows who killed her. The last sound her mother heard was the creak of a bicycle chain and a faint laugh fading into the quiet street. It was 6:12 p.m. on a cold Thursday in late October. The girl had just waved goodbye from the driveway, riding circles on her pink bike under the dimming orange sky. Within 7 minutes she was gone, ripped from the edge of her childhood, pulled into a darkness no one has ever truly seen. There were no screams, no shattered glass, just silence. The kind that settles into a place like fog, thick, cold, and impossible to breathe through. Her brother saw the truck, a rusted blue pickup crawling down the street earlier that day. No one paid attention. Why would they? This was a quiet town. Children played on sidewalks. Front doors were left unlocked, and monsters only lived on television until that night. When the mother stepped outside and called her daughter's name, the street answered with nothing but wind. The bike lay on its side, wheels spinning in the dusk. One pink sneaker abandoned in the grass. No witnesses, no clues. Just a horrifying emptiness where a little girl had once been. 4 days later, they found her body in a creek bed 11 miles away. Clothes torn, skin cold, eyes open. The horror of what was done to her remains sealed in autopsy files no one wants to read again. The case was opened, investigated and shelved over and over again. Names came, names went, but none of them stuck. 20 years have passed, no arrests, no answers. And the mother still leaves the porch light on every night, because somewhere, someone knows, and they are still free. Some stories never leave you. They linger in the air like old perfume or cigarette smoke, traces of something that once was and should never have been. This is one of those stories. A little girl vanished right outside her home, on a street where neighbors smiled and children raced bicycles past trimmed lawns and open garages. For years, people said it couldn't happen here, until it did. She was only 10. Her shoes were still untied. Her lunchbox was still on the kitchen counter. She was gone in under 10 minutes and found in a shallow creek days later, her body telling a story that no child should ever be part of. Her killer, still free. Her mother, still waiting. This case isn't just about one crime. It's about silence, about how evil can hide in plain sight, about how a town that once promised safety now whispers rumors no one dares say out loud. 20 years have passed, and still no justice, only questions. And one single horrifying truth: whoever did this is still out there. Before we begin, I want to ask you to do something. Subscribe to this channel if stories like this matter to you. Leave a like so more people can learn about the darkness that still hides in plain sight, and comment below, from which city and country are you watching this story? Let's see how far this cold case can reach, because maybe, just maybe, someone out there knows something, and sometimes truth only comes when the right ears are finally listening. Now take a breath and come with me into the shadows of a case that still haunts an entire town. Chapter 1. The Last Evening. It was October 23rd. The kind of evening that paints the sky in bruised purples and dying gold, when the wind is cold enough to sting, but not enough to stay inside. Briar Lane was quiet, tucked behind a row of sycamore trees that dropped their brittle leaves like whispers on the pavement. Families were finishing dinner, garage lights clicked on, sprinklers sputtered to life, and in front of house number 47, a girl named Lily rode her bike in tight little circles, counting each lap under her breath. Her mother, Caroline, was folding laundry in the living room, the television playing quietly in the background. She glanced through the window every few minutes, just enough to see the top of Lily's head pass by. It was their usual routine. 10 minutes of fresh air before bath time. The street had never felt dangerous before. They had lived there for 11 years. Nothing ever happened in Maple Ridge. That's what they all said. At 6:08 p.m., a neighbor remembered seeing a dark blue pickup truck parked halfway down the block. The engine was still running. No one saw who was behind the wheel. Some said the windows were tinted. Others weren't sure if it was there at all. Later, that small detail would tear the entire investigation into pieces because no one could agree on what they had actually seen. At 6:12 p.m., Carolyn stepped outside to call Lily in. Her voice cut through the wind, short and warm. "Lily, come on! It's time!" But the street was empty. The bike was gone. The space where her daughter had been riding was just blank. For a moment she thought maybe Lily had gone around the corner, maybe to see the neighbors, maybe to chase a squirrel. The mind, when frightened, invents calm explanations. It's a survival mechanism. What broke that illusion was the silence. No laughing, no footsteps, no wheel turning. Just stillness, sharp and sudden. Then she saw it, the pink bicycle lying sideways on the grass across the street, the front wheel still spinning, and beside it, one of Lily's sneakers, small, white, and facing the wrong direction. Caroline ran. She screamed her daughter's name so hard her throat tore. Doors opened, lights turned on. Neighbors stepped out with puzzled expressions that quickly melted into panic. One man said he saw a blue pickup peeling off just 5 minutes earlier. Another said he thought it was the delivery guy. Someone called 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, mechanical, detached, asking for details as if time weren't bleeding out of every second. By 6:20 p.m., patrol cars arrived. Officers moved in a flurry of questions, tape, flashlights, radios. The scene was small but sacred. A bike, a shoe, a handful of leaves crushed underfoot. They combed the block. They knocked on every door. No one had seen the actual abduction. Not one pair of eyes had caught the moment where Lily vanished from her own life. The sun dipped lower, helicopters circled, dogs were brought in, news vans arrived before midnight. Caroline sat on the curb, rocking back and forth with Lily's other shoe in her hands. She didn't cry, not yet. She just stared at the spinning wheel of the bicycle as if it might rewind time if she looked hard enough. Detectives marked the pickup sighting as a lead, but the description was too vague. There were dozens of blue trucks in the county, and without a license plate, it was like chasing a shadow through smoke. That night, investigators did what they could, collected fibers, scanned for prints, checked cameras from the gas station 2 blocks away. Nothing usable. The street had swallowed her. By morning, flyers with Lily's face were stapled to every pole and storefront within 10 miles. Her photo showed her smiling wide, 2 missing teeth and sun on her cheeks. But that image, the innocence, the joy, was already a ghost. Something brutal had happened in those lost minutes, and the clock had started ticking. Chapter 2. The 4 days of nothing. Day 1 was chaos, the kind that fractures every second into a million sharp pieces. Officers set up a command post 2 blocks from the house, draped in yellow tape and cold coffee. Caroline sat in a folding chair outside the station, wrapped in a blanket she didn't remember bringing. She answered the same questions over and over. What time did she last see Lily? What direction was the bike facing? Did anyone new move into the neighborhood recently? Every answer felt like sand slipping between her fingers. Detective Wallace took lead. Mid-40s, ex-military, the kind of man who looked carved from stone but had eyes that blinked too much when he was lying. He promised the family they'd find her fast. But by nightfall, there was no progress. The blue truck had vanished like a bad dream. No plate, no clear driver description, no traffic camera caught it turning off Briar Lane. It was as if the vehicle had driven straight out of reality. Local media flooded the town by sunrise. Reporters with umbrellas and shaky hands interviewed neighbors who suddenly remembered details they'd missed the night before. One woman said she saw a man leaning against a fence, smoking. Another swore she heard a scream around 6, but it might have been a fox. The desperation in their voices was obvious. They weren't giving information. They were trying to convince themselves they hadn't looked away when it mattered. Caroline refused to leave her porch. She slept there the second night, bundled in her daughter's sleeping bag, clutching a stuffed rabbit Lily had named Sugar. Every sound made her jump. Every car that slowed down made her stand. And every morning she woke up to an empty street and the bike still in evidence custody. On the third day, the town changed. Garage doors stayed closed. Children were pulled from school. Mailboxes were checked twice. People began to look at each other differently, too long, too carefully. The idea that someone among them could have done this settled in like a virus. One father refused to let his kids leave the house. Another installed cameras on every window. It was no longer a mystery. It was a threat with no face. Then came the phone calls. Around 2 a.m., Caroline's landline rang. Static, breathing, then nothing. It happened again the next night. Police traced the number. Public payphone, highway rest stop 30 miles away. A prank, maybe, or maybe not. The possibility that someone was watching her, that someone was taunting her, bled into her bones. She stopped answering. She unplugged every phone in the house. On the fourth morning, just after dawn, a jogger found something in the reeds along Denton Creek, 11 miles from Briar Lane. At first, he thought it was a trash bag. Then he saw the hand, pale, still, small. The scream that followed cracked through the trees and brought officers within minutes. Wallace arrived before the sun finished rising. She was found curled on her side, clothes torn, skin bruised, a gash behind the ear. But there were no drag marks, no signs of struggle, no footprints. Whoever placed her there knew what they were doing. The area had flooded 2 days earlier from a sudden rain. Evidence, if there had been any, was gone with the current. Her eyes were still open. Caroline was told in the hallway of the sheriff's office. No press, no ceremony, just a sentence delivered flatly. "We found her, I'm sorry." She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and didn't come out for 38 minutes. When she did, she asked for Lily's bike back. No one said no. The town held its breath. Funerals are supposed to bring closure. But this wasn't closure. This was a wound, torn open and left to rot. The case shifted from abduction to homicide, from hope to horror. And worse, there were still no suspects. Just a girl, a creek, and silence. Chapter 3. Shadows behind the curtains. Detective Wallace stood in front of a press conference on the 5th day. He looked tired, thinner, like something had been carved out of him and not put back. He read from a sheet of paper, "We are pursuing active leads. We are working with the FBI. We urge the public to come forward with any information, no matter how small." He didn't take questions. He didn't need to. The crowd could see it in his face. There was nothing new to say. Behind closed doors, the investigation was in disarray. The few leads they had were contradictions wearing badges. One neighbor claimed to have seen a man in a hoodie near the woods that evening. Another remembered hearing a door slam. But no one could remember the license plate of the blue truck. No fingerprints had matched. The surveillance footage from the gas station down the road, corrupted, static. One of the tapes had been accidentally overwritten. Mistake, they said. The first name that surfaced was Dean Keller, 37, divorced, lived 2 blocks from Caroline. He was quiet, worked nights and didn't speak to neighbors. That was enough. Rumors spread like oil in water. People stared at him in grocery stores. Someone threw a rock at his mailbox. He was brought in for questioning, asked where he'd been that night. He had an alibi, security footage from his job at the auto parts warehouse, time-stamped and undeniable. He was released, but his name never really left people's mouths. Then came the janitor, Gerald Shaw, 61. Worked at Lily's elementary school. He had keys to every room, walked the halls alone after dark. Parents panicked. One mother pulled her child out of school completely. But Shaw had been on vacation in another state when Lily disappeared. Verified by hotel records and toll booth logs, another dead end, another scar. In the absence of truth, the town began inventing its own. Some whispered about a drifter seen at the edge of town, camping in the woods. Others blamed the new mailman. A few even turned their suspicion toward Caroline's ex-husband, who hadn't seen Lily in years. He was questioned, he cried, he begged them to find who did it. He was cleared. Still, his picture ended up on a forum 3 weeks later under the headline, "Father of the girl, too quiet?" Meanwhile, Caroline was shrinking. She barely spoke. She didn't return calls. She stayed indoors, curtains always drawn, blinds closed. Her refrigerator emptied, the dishes piled up. But every night at exactly 6:12 p.m., she lit a candle on the front step. Same time, Lily had vanished. No one knew whether it was a ritual or a warning, maybe both. Detectives began re-interviewing neighbors, one by one. They asked again about the truck, about strangers, about Lily's routines. One officer noted how many people seemed too eager to give information, like they were building alibis they didn't need. One woman claimed to remember a funny smell in the air that night. Another said she saw someone lurking behind a hedge, but when asked for specifics, they couldn't remember which hedge or which direction the smell came from. Wallace started losing sleep. He began taking the case file home, reading over the same timelines again and again, hoping something would shift, but it never did. Everything fit too neatly, or not at all. He once told a colleague that it felt like the town was staging a play, each person reading from a script, just enough to seem innocent, but never enough to be helpful. 10 days after Lily's funeral, a package arrived at the police department. No return address. Inside was a VHS tape, grainy, flickering, soundless. It showed a girl riding a bike. Lily. The timestamp matched the day of her disappearance. The camera was across the street, hidden behind a curtain, zoomed in. At 6:11 p.m., she stops pedaling, turns her head. The screen glitches, then nothing. The feed cuts to black. The source was never identified. The house it came from had been abandoned for 6 years. The case had officially turned. This was no longer just a tragedy. This was something else. Colder, deliberate, patient. The killer had been watching. Maybe still was. The town was no longer mourning. It was afraid. Chapter 4. The Man with No Face. They brought in a profiler from Quantico, Dr. Elaine Kessler, mid-50s, clipped words, no small talk. She read the case file in a single afternoon, then walked the street where Lily vanished, alone. She stood on the curb for 23 minutes, staring at the spot where the bicycle had been found. When she returned to the station, she said, without hesitation, "You're looking for someone who knew her routine, someone who watched, someone local." Her analysis was clinical, brutal, and terrifyingly accurate. The killer didn't act on impulse. He didn't panic. He chose a window of less than 4 minutes. He knew the layout of the street, the rhythms of the neighborhood, which houses had line of sight, and which ones didn't. "You're not dealing with a monster," she said. "You're dealing with a man who hides behind normal." She drew a composite of the profile, likely male, late 30s to mid-50s, works a job with irregular hours, or one that gives access to the neighborhood, probably single. Maybe socially awkward, charming enough to go unnoticed, intelligent, methodical, a collector, possibly someone who had tried before and failed. Wallace didn't want to believe it. He'd been chasing ghosts, drifters, outsiders, strangers. The idea that the killer might live 2 houses down, might have waved at Caroline during the search party, might have stood beside him at the vigil. That was a rot he wasn't ready to let in. Meanwhile, the town grew quieter. Kids stopped playing outside. Porch lights were left on all night. Someone installed a private security tower at the end of the block. No one walked their dogs after dark. Trust had died, and fear had moved in. Caroline found a note in her mailbox. No envelope. Just a folded piece of paper with 7 words printed in red ink. "You weren't watching, I always was." No fingerprints, no fibers, no security footage. The letter might have been written by anyone, or everyone. She didn't call the police. She burned it in the sink and sat in the kitchen until sunrise, holding a knife in both hands. That week, Wallace ordered a full re-canvass of the entire neighborhood. Officers knocked on every door within a 10-mile radius. Some people were polite, some were angry, some refused to answer. One man slammed the door after saying, "You should have looked closer the first time." Dr. Kessler requested all prior abuse reports filed in the area over the past 10 years. She combed through dozens of names. Teachers, step-parents, coaches, but nothing connected, at least not on paper. "He's not sloppy," she muttered. "He doesn't break rules. He bends them until they disappear." One officer, new to the force, asked if it was possible that the killer had returned to the scene. Dr. Kessler didn't blink. "He never left," she replied. "You're looking for a man who smiles at your children while hiding something in his basement." And so, the search turned inward. Every eye became a mirror. Every handshake a threat, and the more they looked, the less they trusted anyone. Chapter 5. The Rabbit in the Hallway. 2 weeks after the letter, Caroline heard a noise. 3 knocks at the front door. Not the bell, just 3 soft, deliberate taps. She checked the peephole. No one. She opened the door. Nothing, except a single object sitting neatly on the welcome mat. Lily's stuffed rabbit. Sugar. The toy had been taken in as evidence the night Lily disappeared. Caroline hadn't seen it since. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It smelled faintly of damp wood and something else, metallic, sour, like blood left too long in the air. She dropped it and backed away, then slammed the door and locked every bolt. She called Wallace. He arrived 10 minutes later, armed and pale. "This wasn't in evidence anymore," he muttered. "Someone signed it out under your name." She hadn't. She swore it. The logbook showed a signature that almost matched. Almost. It had been done 3 days earlier. No cameras showed who. Forensics dusted the toy. No prints, no hair. But inside the stuffing, hidden deep within a seam, they found something new. A strip of film, no larger than a postage stamp. When developed, it showed a single frame. Lily's bike, the same angle as the VHS tape, same lighting. But this image was clearer and taken from higher up, from a window. Caroline's home was checked. No signs of intrusion, no windows forced, no cameras tampered with. But then Wallace saw it. The attic window across the street, inside the old Wilkins house, abandoned since 2014, boarded up, condemned. No one had lived there in years, or so they thought. They entered the house the next morning. Dust covered every surface. Footprints, several, crisscrossed the floor. In the attic, behind a false wall, they found a chair, a camera, and dozens of undeveloped rolls of film. Some dated back a decade. One was labeled 6:12 p.m. Most of the film had decayed. Some frames were ruined, but others showed children playing, walking, laughing, unaware. One showed Lily climbing the front steps of her home. Another, her brushing her teeth, the curtains open. None of the pictures could have been taken from the street. It was surveillance, years of it, meticulous, categorized, stamped by time and date. But there were no fingerprints, no receipts, no DNA. Whoever used that space had done it carefully, cleanly. No one ever saw them enter. No one saw them leave, and no one heard the shutter clicks. For a moment, Wallace believed they were close, that something here would break the silence, but nothing did. No names, no faces, just the weight of watching, a sickness left behind in photographs. Caroline vomited when she saw the pictures, then asked a single question. How long was he watching us? There was no answer. Only film, only shadows. Only a killer who knew how to hide in plain sight. And someone who had once lived behind the walls of a house no one looked at anymore. Chapter 6. The Other Girl. The Wilkins house was sealed by police tape, but its secrets had already escaped. Wallace ordered a deep scan through the cold case archive, looking for any similar patterns: abductions, girls unsolved, late afternoons, window angles. He didn't expect much. But 3 days later, a file from 1998 arrived. Same state, different town, 10-year-old girl, missing bicycle. Abducted at 6:14 p.m. Body found in a wooded area 5 days later. No suspect, no witness. One eerie detail: her name was also Lily. The profiler, Dr. Kessler, requested the files immediately. The photos, the evidence logs, the coroner reports, everything. The similarities were uncanny. Same wound behind the ear, same placement of the body, same absence of physical evidence. Even the funeral photos looked identical. Two mothers, 20 years apart, with the same hollow in their eyes. Wallace drove 3 hours to speak to the first Lily's mother. She lived alone now, just outside of Nashwood. Her hands shook as she poured coffee. When he mentioned the other Lily, her eyes flooded instantly. "I knew it," she whispered. "I always knew it wasn't just me." She had kept a locked drawer filled with clippings, letters, photos that had been mailed to her anonymously, pictures of her daughter, taken through windows. One photo stopped Wallace cold. It showed the first Lily at her kitchen table eating cereal. Behind her, through the glass, the reflection of a shadowed face. Distorted, but there, watching, smiling. The timestamp, October 23rd, 1998, exactly 22 years before the second Lily disappeared. Dr. Kessler confirmed what Wallace was afraid to admit. This was a pattern, a cycle. Every 22 years? He asked. No, she said. Every time the right opportunity appears. The killer wasn't tied to a date. He was tied to a method, a ritual, a set of rules only he understood. They reopened the 1998 case, dug through records, interviewed old officers, forensic techs, neighbors long gone. One name surfaced: Caleb Rourke. A groundskeeper at the school both girls had attended, years apart. No convictions, no red flags, just a long history of working jobs that kept him close to children, unnoticed. But Caleb had vanished in 2001. No known address, no employment, no bank activity, a ghost in the system. If he was alive, he'd be in his late 50s now. Dr. Kessler suggested he wasn't gone, just reinvented. Predators like this, she said, don't disappear. They relocate, and they evolve. Wallace dug harder. DMV records, employment logs, alias databases, facial recognition from state driver licenses, and finally a hit, a man named Kevin Rolton, working maintenance at a private retirement home 40 miles from Maple Ridge. The photo, older, beard, glasses, but the eyes matched. Cold. Calculated. Surveillance was set, quiet, cautious. They watched him for 6 days. He followed patterns, took late-night walks, spoke to no one. He had no car, no family visits, no digital presence. On the 7th day, Wallace walked into his office alone and found it empty. Desk cleared, locker cleaned out, gone. All he left behind was a single photograph taped to the inside of the locker door. It showed Lily, the second one, smiling and looking directly into the lens. Chapter 7. The letters return. 3 days after the suspect vanished, Caroline received another envelope. No stamp, just placed in the center of her welcome mat like a ritual offering. Inside, a single Polaroid, her backyard, taken at night. In the photo, the porch light was off, but she had left it on. The image had been taken within the last 48 hours, which meant he had been close. Maybe still was. Wallace swept the property. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of entry. He installed cameras, doubled patrols, but Caroline was already unraveling. The fear that had once lived in her chest now whispered through every room. The next morning, there was another envelope. This time, it held a cassette tape. No label, just static for 2 minutes, then breathing, slow, rhythmic. Then a voice. She called out for you. Caroline dropped it. The sound kept playing. She called out, but you were folding clothes. Wallace called in a tech team to trace the audio. The cadence, the background noise, but it was clean, manufactured, carefully crafted. No vocal match could be found. He knew what this was now, not a confession, a performance. The killer was making Caroline relive it, piece by piece, frame by frame. Dr. Kessler warned them, this is escalation. He's bored. He wants power again. He's preparing for something. And the worst part, there was nothing they could legally do. No fingerprints, no threats, no suspect in custody. Just shadows speaking in whispers and static. The town was rotting from the inside. Rumors came back. Theories grew like mold. Some believed the killer was already dead, and this was a copycat. Others were convinced Carolyn was involved. She received stares at the supermarket. Her tires were slashed. A dead bird was left on her doorstep. Wallace stayed close. Spent nights parked outside her house, engine running. He was losing sleep, losing his grip. The press had gone quiet. The public had moved on. Only Caroline and the man who haunted her still lived in that hell, and neither of them were willing to let go. Then came the third package, delivered to the police station. No return address. A black box, locked tight. Inside, a ring of keys. House keys, locker keys, one shaped like an old-school filing cabinet. Engraved on it, Wilkins 4. Wallace returned to the Wilkins house. The attic had been cleared, but the basement, rarely touched, was still locked. The key opened a hidden hatch behind the boiler. Inside, a crawl space, dust, nails, rusted chains, and a journal, handwritten, pages and pages, entries dated all the way back to 1986. The journal ended with one line: "She smiled when I told her she wouldn't be alone." Chapter 8. The Journal. The journal was wrapped in black cloth, brittle with age. Each page was lined with a crooked, childlike hand, neat, deliberate, not rambling, not madness. This was control, practiced over decades. The entries weren't signed, but they spoke in first person. Confessions, rituals, descriptions of children, how they moved, how they blinked, how they cried when they realized no one was coming. Wallace read the first 20 pages in silence. Each one felt like a weight pressing deeper into his chest. The entries weren't dated with words, just times and initials. 6:12 p.m. LH. 6:14 p.m. KS. 6:11 p.m. LM. Names, dozens of them, all girls, all vanished. The pages described everything: the routes they took home from school, what snacks they liked, which parent they trusted more. Each child had been studied for weeks, sometimes months, before vanishing. Whoever wrote this hadn't just taken them. He had lived inside their lives before stealing them out of them. Dr. Kessler sat with the journal for hours. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. When she finally looked up, her voice was dry. "This isn't just one killer." Wallace stared. "What do you mean?" She turned the page and pointed. "These aren't all written by the same hand." There were shifts in pressure, rhythm, word choices. The first half of the journal was clinical. The second half, desperate, erratic, as if someone else had taken over the writing or learned from the first, a passing of the sickness, a legacy. The theory hit like a brick: a second killer, someone who had studied the original, continued the work, a disciple. Maybe someone from the same neighborhood or the same bloodline. The last 10 pages were newer, different ink, fresh pen strokes. They referenced Lily, the second one. Her photo was glued into the final page. Below it, she looked right at me. She knew. She remembered. Caroline was brought in. She refused to read the journal. But she asked one thing: had Lily been alive for a while? Wallace didn't answer. He couldn't. But the look in his eyes was enough. And she collapsed in the hallway of the station, sobbing with her face in her hands. The press never saw the journal. It was too dangerous, too much horror to explain. Wallace kept it in an evidence locker under his own name. But every night, he reread it, trying to match the names, the patterns, wondering how many children were never even reported missing, how many ghosts walked unseen, and worse than that, he wondered how many more journals were still out there, waiting, Chapter 9. The New Disappearance. It was a Tuesday when the next girl went missing. Different town, 40 miles west, 9 years old. Her name was Emily. The story was the same. Bike on the sidewalk, sneaker in the grass, silence where there should have been laughter. It was as if time had looped. Wallace drove there himself, met the local sheriff, told him everything. They searched the entire region. Nothing, no footprints, no tire marks, no evidence. But this time, there was something new. Inside Emily's backpack, left on the front steps, was a single photograph. Lily, dead. Dr. Kessler stared at the photo in silence. "He's mocking us," she whispered. "This is a performance. He's not hiding anymore. He's showing us the stage." The horror was no longer random. It was ritualized, repeating, and each time bolder. The photo had no fingerprints, but the chemical composition of the paper matched one used in the Wilkins house. The link was confirmed. Whoever had written the second half of the journal had taken Emily too. Wallace knew what came next. They wouldn't find Emily alive. They would find her body in 3 or 4 days, somewhere quiet, somewhere cruel. And the press would recycle the same headlines, the same hollow promises, the same cold outrage. He stood in the woods for hours, searching, hoping, but he already felt her absence. It clung to the branches like frost. When they finally found her, face down in a shallow stream, he didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just sat beside her, knees in the mud, until someone pulled him away. Caroline called him that night. She had heard the news. Her voice was distant, hollow. "I dream of him," she said, "of his face. But I never see it. Only the smile. It's always the smile." Wallace didn't speak. They just stayed on the line, breathing. Kessler handed him a folder the next day. "There will be more," she said. "Unless we stop chasing ghosts and start looking at who's standing right next to us." They started compiling names, children, towns, school employees, patterns so precise they felt impossible. And in the middle of all of it, a single name kept surfacing. A man, still alive, still nearby. And just like that, Wallace felt it again, that hollow pressure in his chest. The feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching. Chapter 10. The Final Door. The name was Martin Dale, retired custodian. Worked at both towns 20 years apart. No criminal record, no wife, no children. Rented cabins, changed numbers often. But what mattered wasn't the paper trail. It was the face. Wallace saw the DMV photo and knew it was him. The smile, the eyes, the shape of the silence in his presence, the kind of man who opens doors with the same hand he closes lives. Wallace drove out to the cabin. Remote, deep woods, off the grid. He didn't tell anyone he was going. He wanted to see the man alone. The door was unlocked. The air smelled of mold and metal. Wallace stepped inside, gun drawn. There were no lights, only the hum of a small refrigerator and the sound of footsteps above him, soft, slow, deliberate. He called out, "Martin?" No answer. He climbed the stairs. Each step groaned like something alive. At the top, a hallway, 3 doors, 1 closed, 2 open. The closed one had a red ribbon tied to the knob. He opened it. Inside was a room lined with photographs, not just of Lily, of dozens of children, their faces frozen in laughter, in confusion, in fear. The walls were a shrine to observation, and in the center of the room, a single chair, empty, facing the wall. Martin was gone. All that remained was a final page, pinned to the wall with a sewing needle. It read, "The stage is never empty, you just haven't seen the next act yet." Wallace stepped back, lowered the gun, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt truly afraid. because the door had been open when he arrived, and the floorboards had creaked behind him when no one else should have been home. The case remains unsolved. The journal is locked in federal evidence, the photos archived, the recordings secured, but justice? Still a ghost. Caroline moved away. No one knows where. Her house was sold, and the new owners never learned what had happened there. The porch light, however, still works. Every night at 6:12 p.m. it turns on automatically. A forgotten setting, or maybe something else. If you've watched this far, tell us where you're watching from, what city, what country, because stories like this shouldn't stay hidden. Maybe the truth is waiting in a place no one has looked yet, or maybe he's already looking back.